They said the march was impossible. They said the French army could never be beaten. But on one blistering summer morning in 1704, an English commander defied every rule of war and destroyed an empire in a single stroke. This is the untold story of how John Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough, turned certain defeat into one of the greatest victories in history. Hello everyone, you're watching Vanished Files, where history's forgotten battles and unseen truths come alive. And trust me, when you hear what really happened at Blenheim, you'll be shocked at how one man's impossible gamble changed the fate of Europe forever. Don't forget to subscribe, because what you're about to discover is a story that rewrote history itself. It was the dawn of the 18th century, and Europe trembled beneath the golden shadow of France's most magnificent ruler, King Louis XIV, the self-proclaimed Sun King. For over half a century, his brilliance had illuminated France, turning it into the wealthiest, most powerful, and most feared nation on the continent. His palaces shimmered with gold, his armies marched with unbroken pride, and his ambition stretched beyond his borders toward dominance over all of Europe. While his courtiers toasted his glory at Versailles, the rest of Europe watched with growing dread. England, Austria, the Dutch Republic, all of them saw the same future, a Europe bent beneath the will of a single king. Louis's dreams of conquest were wrapped in silk and ceremony, but beneath the elegance of his court burned a relentless hunger for expansion. He had already fought wars that left entire kingdoms bankrupt. His soldiers, hardened and disciplined, were veterans of decades of campaigns. His generals, Conde, Turenne, Luxembourg, were legends. To the world, France seemed invincible. But power breeds fear, and fear breeds alliances. Across the English Channel, Queen Anne's government began to whisper of balance, the need to keep one power from dominating the others. In Vienna, the Habsburg Emperor felt the pressure of French troops creeping closer to his borders. And in the cold halls of The Hague, Dutch diplomats plotted a network of coalitions, determined to contain the growing French Empire before it swallowed them all. Europe had survived tyrants before, but none with the resources or reach of Louis XIV. He was not just a monarch, he was an idea, a symbol of absolute authority and divine right. When he moved, the world shifted. When he spoke, kingdoms listened. And when he waged war, entire generations bled. Yet beneath the grandeur of his reign, cracks were beginning to form. His people were tired of taxes and endless wars. His enemies had learned from defeat, and the moment that would test his power was about to arrive, triggered not by rebellion or betrayal, but by a death hundreds of miles away. In 1700, the King of Spain, Charles II, died without an heir. With his death came a question that would ignite Europe in flames. Who would rule the Spanish Empire? The vast network of colonies, lands, and wealth stretching from Mexico to Milan, Louis XIV moved swiftly, placing his own grandson, Philip of Anjou, on the Spanish throne. It seemed a masterstroke, a peaceful inheritance that would link France and Spain into one unstoppable superpower. But to the rest of Europe, it was a nightmare come true. France had overstepped. The balance of power was broken. And from London to Vienna, from The Hague to Berlin, rulers began to prepare for war. They would call it the War of the Spanish Succession, but in truth, it was a war for the soul of Europe. And as armies began to mobilize and the drums of conflict echoed across the continent, one question hung in the air. Could anyone stop the Sun King? The answer would come 4 years later, in a quiet Bavarian village called Blenheim, where the fate of Europe would be decided in blood, smoke, and fire. By the spring of 1701, Europe was a powder keg waiting for a spark, and that spark had just been lit. The death of Spain's king had not merely created a vacancy, it had opened a wound across the continent, one that would bleed for more than a decade. Louis XIV's decision to place his grandson on the Spanish throne was viewed in every royal court as a declaration of dominance. A France united with Spain under Bourbon rule would mean one family controlling an empire so vast. It circled the globe, from the gold mines of the Americas to the Mediterranean ports of Europe. It was a nightmare scenario for Britain, Austria, and the Dutch Republic. Almost overnight, alliances began to form in secret chambers lit by flickering candlelight. England's newly crowned Queen Anne backed her ministers in forming the Grand Alliance, a coalition sworn to preserve Europe's balance of power and stop Louis XIV's growing empire. Across the continent, diplomats drafted pacts while armies sharpened their blades. It was no longer about Spain, it was about survival. The War of the Spanish Succession had begun. The first campaigns unfolded with brutal efficiency. France and its ally Bavaria pushed deep into southern Germany, crushing resistance and threatening Vienna itself. The French army, led by Marshal Tallard and the Elector of Bavaria, boasted nearly unstoppable momentum. Their banners fluttered across the Rhine. Their muskets thundered through the Danube Valley. Villages burned, and entire regions fell under French occupation. Meanwhile, Britain and Austria scrambled to coordinate a counterattack, their generals divided by distance and distrust. The Allied hopes rested on two men who could not have been more different: John Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough, a cunning English commander known for his unshakable composure and genius for strategy, and Prince Eugene of Savoy, the fearless Austrian general whose courage on the battlefield bordered on reckless. Together, they represented the last chance to turn the tide. In London, Marlborough convinced Parliament to fund a massive expedition to the continent, promising victory where others had failed. His plan was audacious, a march that would take his troops hundreds of miles across hostile territory to strike the French, where they least expected. It was the kind of move only a gambler or a visionary would attempt, and Marlborough was both. The year 1704 would become his crucible. As the French tightened their grip on Bavaria and threatened Vienna, Marlborough set his army in motion. Tens of thousands of British, Dutch, and German soldiers began a grueling march through rivers, forests, and mountains, carrying the hopes of Europe on their weary shoulders. Supplies ran low, disease spread, and exhaustion gnawed at their ranks. But the Duke pressed on, his eye fixed on one objective: to meet the French and Bavarians head-on. Before they could reach Austria's capital, it was a race against time. If Vienna fell, the war would be lost, and France would stand unchallenged across the continent. As summer approached, rumors spread through Europe that the English were attempting the impossible. Marlborough's army moved like a phantom across the landscape, deceiving his enemies and inspiring his allies. Every mile they marched brought them closer to destiny. By early August, they reached the banks of the Danube River, near a quiet Bavarian village named Blenheim. There, beneath the blazing sun, two of the greatest generals in Europe would soon meet in a confrontation that would decide the future of nations. The war that had set Europe on fire was about to reach its inferno. By early August 1704, the sun hung low over the Bavarian plains, its heat shimmering off the armor of exhausted men who had marched farther than any army in living memory. The Duke of Marlborough's march to Blenheim was not simply a movement of troops. It was a feat of endurance, deception, and genius. For 6 relentless weeks, his coalition of English, Dutch, and German soldiers had crossed rivers, climbed mountains, and endured the unending torment of summer heat. Men's boots rotted, horses collapsed, and food ran scarce, yet discipline never broke. Marlborough's vision held them together, a vision that promised not just victory, but salvation for all of Europe. He knew that every day's delay allowed the French and Bavarians to grow stronger. He also knew that Vienna was barely holding on, the Austrian court already preparing to flee if French banners appeared on the horizon. The Duke's only hope lay in speed and secrecy. Moving his troops with the precision of a chess master, he disguised his intent from both friend and foe alike. Even his own officers were uncertain of the final destination. Letters were sent along false routes. Scouts spread rumors of attacks toward Alsace and the Moselle to mislead French intelligence. Louis XIV's commanders believed Marlborough was retreating, when, in truth, he was advancing straight toward them. By the time the deception was uncovered, it was too late. Marlborough had outmaneuvered the greatest army in Europe and placed his men in striking distance of Bavaria. Yet, his situation remained perilous. His army was far from home, deep in enemy territory, cut off from its supply lines, and dangerously low on provisions. Desertions began to increase, and the Duke knew morale could collapse if something did not change soon. That change came in the form of an alliance, the arrival of Prince Eugene of Savoy, the Austrian commander, fierce and battle-hardened, brought with him fresh troops and the indomitable spirit of the Habsburg Empire. When Marlborough and Eugene met near the Danube, it was a moment that would echo through history. Two men, born in different worlds, united by one purpose: to stop France. They spoke little but understood each other instantly. Marlborough provided the calm intellect, Eugene the burning passion. Together, they forged a partnership that balanced reason with fire, one that would reshape Europe's fate. Their plan was bold. Facing them stood the combined forces of Marshal Tallard and the Elector of Bavaria. Entrenched near the village of Blenheim, or as the English would soon call it, Blenheim, the French army numbered nearly 60,000 men, supported by powerful artillery and veteran cavalry. They believed the Allied army to be too exhausted, too far from its base, too fractured to pose a real threat. They were wrong. Marlborough and Eugene studied the terrain. The Danube River glimmered on one side, while the village of Blenheim lay at the heart of the French position. Tallard's troops seemed confident, perhaps even careless, as they fortified the village and set up their lines. Marlborough's keen eye saw what they did not. Their deployment was overextended, leaving dangerous gaps between their forces. It was an opportunity that only a commander of genius could recognize, and one he would soon exploit with devastating precision. On the evening of August 12th, Marlborough rode among his weary men, speaking softly, his calm voice cutting through the night air. "Tomorrow," he told them, "we shall fight to decide not only the fate of this army, but the liberty of all Europe." Campfires flickered across the fields as thousands of soldiers prepared for the dawn. Some wrote letters home, others prayed in silence, knowing many would never see another sunrise. And when that sunrise finally came, the fields near Blenheim shimmered with dew, a peaceful landscape that, within hours, would be transformed into one of the bloodiest battlefields of the 18th century. The march was over. The reckoning had begun. Dawn broke over the fields of Blenheim on August 13, 1704, with a sky so calm and golden that it gave no hint of the storm about to unfold. Mist drifted across the Danube as the distant toll of church bells mingled with the metallic rattle of muskets and armor. The men on both sides stirred from uneasy sleep, their stomachs hollow, their nerves coiled tight. Before them lay the quiet Bavarian countryside, its farms and villages soon to be soaked in blood. The French commander, Marshal Tallard, confident in his numbers, had arranged his 60,000 men in a long, seemingly impenetrable line stretching nearly for miles. The left rested on the village of Lutzingen, held by Bavarian troops. The center anchored at Oberglau, and the right dominated the village of Blenheim, bristling with thousands of French infantry. It was a formidable position, or so Tallard believed. Across the open plain, the Duke of Marlborough and Prince Eugene of Savoy surveyed the enemy from horseback, their expressions calm, their minds calculating every detail: the slope of the ground, the glint of the river, the placement of every cannon. Marlborough, ever the tactician, saw what few others could. The French line was stretched too thin, its center vulnerable, its right overcommitted. If he could draw the enemy into Blenheim and then crush the weakened middle, he might turn the impossible into victory. As the sun climbed higher, the air grew tense. At precisely 8 a.m., the first Allied cannons thundered to life, their roar echoing off the Danube's waters. The Battle of Blenheim had begun. Marlborough's troops advanced in measured precision, British redcoats in tight formation, drums pounding, their bayonets gleaming like a wall of steel. The first clashes erupted at the village of Blenheim, where French infantry fought fiercely from behind stone walls and fences. The fighting was brutal, close, and unrelenting. Smoke filled the air, turning the morning bright into a choking haze of fire and lead. The cries of the wounded mingled with the thunder of cannonballs and the sharp crack of musket fire. Marlborough's plan was taking shape. He ordered relentless assaults on Blenheim, not to seize it immediately, but to pin down Tallard's right wing, trapping tens of thousands of French troops inside the village where they could not maneuver. Meanwhile, Prince Eugene led the Allied right against the Bavarian lines at Lutzingen. His men faced fierce resistance, wave after wave of musket volleys and cavalry charges. Horses screamed, men fell in heaps, and yet Eugene refused to retreat. His determination held the flank firm, ensuring Marlborough could focus on the center. By midday, the battlefield was chaos, smoke so thick that soldiers could barely see the enemy, only the flash of musket fire in the fog. Bodies littered the fields, drums lay shattered, flags torn and blackened. But amidst the carnage, Marlborough moved like a man possessed, calm and deliberate. His aides rode beside him, delivering orders as he repositioned regiments and artillery with surgical precision. Round 1 o'clock, he saw his chance. The French center, thinly held between Blenheim and Oberglau, had begun to buckle under pressure. He ordered his cavalry, over 8,000 horsemen, to charge. The ground trembled as British, Dutch, and German riders thundered forward, sabers drawn, banners whipping in the wind. They crashed into the French lines like a tidal wave of steel. The impact shattered Tallard's center, breaking through in a blur of smoke and screams. For a moment, it seemed the French army might recover, but Marlborough pressed harder, driving deeper, exploiting every gap. The French command structure began to collapse. Orders went unheard, units panicked, and confusion spread like wildfire. From his vantage point, Tallard could see his army disintegrating before his eyes. The right wing was trapped in Blenheim, the center was gone, and Eugene's relentless pressure was turning the Bavarian left into a retreat. The once mighty army of France, the pride of Louis XIV, was unraveling. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, Marlborough gave one final command: to encircle Blenheim itself. The trap had closed. Inside the burning village, thousands of French soldiers realized too late that they had been cut off. What began as a battle had become a disaster, one that would haunt France for generations. The fields of Blenheim were no longer a quiet valley. They had become the graveyard of an empire's ambition. By mid-afternoon on August 13, 1704, the battlefield had become a scene of utter ruin. The sun, once bright and golden, now hung over a landscape cloaked in smoke, gunpowder, and human misery. The air reeked of sulfur and sweat, of burning wood and blood. In every direction, shattered regiments stumbled through the haze, flags torn, drums silenced. What had begun as a carefully measured contest had descended into a nightmare. The French right, anchored at the village of Blenheim, was suffocating under its own numbers. Marshal Tallard, desperate to hold the line, had crammed more than 10,000 men inside the village, a decision that turned strength into suffocation. Streets choked with soldiers. Artillery had no space to fire. Formations collapsed into chaos. British and Hessian troops pressed relentlessly against the walls, pouring musket fire into the massed ranks of defenders. The screams of men trapped in the burning houses carried far across the plain. Still, the French fought with desperate valor, repelling wave after wave of allied assaults. But Marlborough's genius was not in brute force. It was in patience and precision. He knew the trap was set, and now he was tightening it inch by inch. The French center had been broken, their cavalry shattered, their left crumbling under Prince Eugene's relentless assault. Yet Tallard still believed he could salvage something, rally his troops, perhaps even retreat in order. But the reality was far worse than he knew. Marlborough's cavalry now swept behind Blenheim, cutting off every road, every escape route. It was a perfect encirclement, a cage from which no army could break free. By 4 o'clock, the French camp dissolved into panic. Officers shouted contradictory orders, drums beat the call to retreat, and soldiers fled in confusion, only to find themselves surrounded by allied squadrons. The Danube River glittered beyond them, a silent witness to their doom. Some tried to swim for it, throwing away weapons and armor, but few made it across. Most drowned beneath the weight of their gear or were swept away by the current. Marlborough watched it all unfold from a ridge near the center, calm and composed even amid the horror. His coat was splattered with mud and blood, his face streaked with smoke, yet his focus never wavered. He had achieved what few commanders in history ever could. He had not only won a battle but annihilated an entire army. Tallard himself was captured, found wandering the field dazed and disbelieving, as if unable to comprehend the scale of his defeat. His carriage, filled with maps and correspondence for Louis XIV, fell into allied hands, sealing the humiliation. Inside Blenheim, resistance continued for hours, desperate and futile. The village was a furnace of fire and death. Roofs collapsed, barns exploded under cannon fire, and the once green fields turned to ash. Thousands of French soldiers, cut off and leaderless, fought until their ammunition ran out. When finally the white flags appeared through the smoke, it was not surrender, it was exhaustion. Over 11,000 French soldiers laid down their arms, marching out in silence as allied troops watched in stunned disbelief. Never before in living memory had such a powerful force been so completely destroyed. By sunset, the fields of Blenheim were carpeted with bodies, friend and foe alike. The Danube ran dark with blood. Marlborough dismounted and walked through the wreckage, his expression grave. He was no man of cruelty, and what he saw filled him with sorrow more than triumph. The horror of the place, he later wrote to his wife, cannot be described. Yet even in that moment, he understood that this day would echo through the centuries. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the silent valley. Smoke still rose from the burning village. The roar of battle was gone, replaced by the low moans of the wounded and the crackle of dying fires. The Battle of Blenheim was over. France, once thought invincible, had been humbled beyond measure. The world had shifted, and Europe would never be the same again. When the smoke finally cleared over Blenheim, the scale of what had happened began to sink in. The once quiet Bavarian valley was now a graveyard stretching for miles. Thousands of bodies lay scattered across the trampled fields, the uniforms of Britain, France, Austria, and Bavaria indistinguishable beneath the grime and blood. Horses lay where they fell, cannons stood twisted and silent, and the Danube flowed past as if trying to wash away the sins of war. Survivors wandered in a daze, searching for comrades who would never rise again. The Battle of Blenheim had lasted barely a single day, yet its consequences would shape the destiny of Europe for generations. The Allied victory was total. France's army, the finest in the world, had not merely been defeated, it had been broken. 30,000 French soldiers were dead, wounded, or captured. Entire regiments ceased to exist. Marshal Tallard, once one of Louis XIV's most trusted commanders, was now a prisoner of war, escorted under guard to England, where the people of London would later cheer his arrival in astonishment. The myth of French invincibility, built over decades of conquest, had been shattered in a single afternoon. For the first time in his long reign, the Sun King faced the unthinkable: humiliation. Across Europe, the news spread like wildfire. Church bells rang in Vienna, London, and The Hague. Crowds filled the streets, celebrating a victory that many had thought impossible. In the courts of Europe, the name John Churchill, Duke of Marlborough, became legend. He was hailed as a savior of the continent, his strategic brilliance compared to the great generals of antiquity. Even his enemies could not deny his genius. Letters and dispatches from the battlefield were copied and distributed across the continent, describing in vivid detail how Marlborough and Prince Eugene had outmaneuvered and outfought the greatest military power of their time. But victory came with a price. The fields around Blenheim remained littered with the dead for weeks, their stench carried on the wind, their bones left to whiten under the sun. Marlborough himself, though celebrated, carried the weight of what he had seen for the rest of his life. He ordered that the wounded of both sides be cared for, that the fallen be buried with dignity. Acts rare in an age when mercy was often forgotten. When he returned to England, Queen Anne granted him a vast estate and ordered the construction of Blenheim Palace, a monument to his triumph. Its walls would later stand not merely as a symbol of victory, but as a reminder of the cost of war. Politically, the ripple effects of Blenheim were immense. The Grand Alliance, once fragile, was reinvigorated. Austria was saved from collapse. France, forced onto the defensive, began a slow and painful retreat from its European ambitions. The dream of Bourbon domination, a France united with Spain in one vast empire, died on those blood-soaked fields. The war would continue for another decade, but Blenheim marked the turning point. From that day forward, Louis XIV would fight not to conquer, but to survive. In the centuries that followed, historians would look back on 1704 as the moment Europe's balance of power was preserved, when a single battle changed the course of nations. Even today, the site of Blenheim remains quiet, its fields green once more, its river calm. Tourists walk where soldiers once fought, unaware that beneath their feet lie the remnants of empires and the echoes of destiny. The Battle of Blenheim was not merely a victory of arms. It was a victory of will, of courage, of leadership against arrogance. It was the day the world learned that even the mightiest kings could fall, and that one man's vision could alter the fate of an entire continent.